Welcome to yet another one of my True Mafia story compilation videos. I've got 6 stories here for you taken from the channel, so you don't have to go browsing for anything and can get your fix with no interruptions. If you like what you hear, feel free to subscribe and join the family. Let's get started. June 1983, East Harlem, Manhattan. FBI agents crept into a small social club at 416 East 115th Street, the Palmer Boys Social Club. 990 square feet, owned by Anthony Fat Tony Solano, acting boss of the Genovese crime family. The agents carried electronic surveillance equipment, microphones, transmitters, battery packs. They planted bugs throughout the club, behind the bar, near the back table where Solano sat every day with his trademark fedora and cigar. Then they left before sunrise. Nobody noticed. For the next 2 years, Solano conducted business as usual. He held meetings with his capos, discussed gambling operations, settled disputes between mobsters from other families. He talked about the Concrete Club, the scheme where all 5 New York families controlled construction bids worth over $2 million. He complained about lack of respect from younger mobsters. He argued with other bosses about money. He spoke freely. This was his headquarters, his territory. The FBI listened to everything, and what they heard became the foundation for the most significant organized crime prosecution in American history, the Mafia Commission Trial. 8 bosses and underbosses convicted, 7 sentenced to 100 years each. The entire leadership of the New York Mafia destroyed in a single case. The Commission: How 5 Families Ruled New York. 1931, New York City. Lucky Luciano organized the meeting of the most powerful gangsters in America. The old bosses, the Mustache Petes, were being pushed out. Younger, more business-minded mobsters were taking over. Luciano proposed a new system, the Commission, a ruling body made up of the bosses of New York's 5 families: Bonanno, Colombo, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese. They'd meet regularly to resolve disputes, approve major decisions, and coordinate criminal activities. No more mob wars, no more families fighting over territory. Everything would be organized, controlled, professional. For over 50 years, the Commission operated in the shadows. Law enforcement knew it existed, but proving it was impossible. The bosses were careful. They rarely met all together. When they did, they spoke in code. They never put anything in writing. By the 1980s, the Commission controlled billions of dollars in illegal operations: construction rackets, labor unions, gambling, loan sharking, drug trafficking. They owned New York, but they'd gotten comfortable. Fat Tony Solano held regular meetings at the Palmer Boys Club. Paul Castellano, boss of the Gambino family, discussed business in his Staten Island mansion. Tony Two Ducks Corallo, boss of the Lucchese family, conducted meetings in his Jaguar while his driver, Salvatore Avellino, chauffeured him around. The FBI saw their opportunity. The bugs. 5 devices that captured everything. The FBI didn't just bug one location, they bugged 5. First, Castellano's home on Todd Hill, Staten Island. The bug captured discussions about the Concrete Club, the construction bid-rigging scheme that became central to the prosecution's case. Second, Corallo's Jaguar. The car bug recorded thousands of conversations as Corallo conducted business while being driven around New York. He discussed labor racketeering, construction rackets, and commission decisions. Third, the Palmer Boys Social Club in East Harlem. Solano's headquarters. The bug captured him meeting with other bosses, discussing family business, and complaining about everything, from respect to money. Fourth, Casa Stork, the restaurant in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. Gennaro, or Jerry Langella, acting boss of the Colombo family, conducted business at his favorite table. The FBI planted a bug in the ceiling directly above. Fifth, Ralph Scopo's union office. Scopo was a Colombo soldier who controlled construction unions. The bug captured him discussing the concrete club with construction executives. 5 bugs, thousands of hours of recordings. The bosses had no idea. The concrete club, 5 devices that captured everything. The most lucrative racket of the commission was concrete. In New York City during the 1980s, construction was booming. Office towers, apartment buildings, hotels, every major project required concrete. The 5 families created the Concrete Club. Here's how it worked. Any construction project requiring more than $2 million worth of concrete had to pay tribute to the mob. The construction companies would bid on projects, but the mob decided who won. The winning company would add a percentage to their bid, usually around 10%, and that money went to the families. The construction companies didn't complain. If they refused to participate, the mob-controlled unions would strike. Projects would stop. Delays would cost millions. So they paid. Castellano coordinated the scheme. Solano had hidden ownership in S&A Concrete Company and Transit Mix Concrete Corporation. Ralph Scopo controlled the Cement and Concrete Workers District Council, Local 6A. Between 1980 and 1985, the Concrete Club generated an estimated $50 million for the 5 families. The FBI bugs captured it all. Conversations about which companies would win bids, discussions about how to divide the money, arguments about percentages. The bosses thought they were untouchable. They'd been running these schemes for decades. Law enforcement couldn't prove anything. Then, Rudolph Giuliani became U.S. Attorney for the Southern New York District. The indictment, February 25, 1985. Giuliani announced indictments against 11 defendants. From the Genovese family, Anthony or Fat Tony Solano, 75 years old, acting boss. Gennaro or Jerry Langella, underboss. From the Gambino family, Paul or Big Paul Castellano, 70 years old, boss and commission chairman. Agnello or Neil Della Croce, 70 years old, underboss. From the Lucchese family, Anthony or Tony Dux Corallo, 73 years old, boss. Salvatore or Tom Mix Santoro, 72 years old, underboss. Christopher or Christy Tick Fernari, 62 years old, consigliere. From the Colombo family, Carmine or Junior Persico, 53 years old, boss. Ralph or Little Ralphie Scopo, 57 years old, soldier and union leader. From the Bonanno family, Philip or Rusty Ristelli, 65 years old, boss. Anthony or Bruno Indelicato, 38 years old, soldier. The charges: racketeering, extortion, labor racketeering, conspiracy, and in Indelicato's case, the 1979 murder of Carmine Galante. Giuliani told reporters, "This case charges that these bosses run a single criminal organization that is a major corrupter of our economic system." He called it the case of cases. Time magazine wrote, "Possibly the most significant assault on the infrastructure of organized crime since the high command of the Chicago Mafia was swept away in 1943. The mob bosses weren't worried. They'd beaten federal cases before. They had the best lawyers money could buy. They'd never talk, never cooperate. They didn't realize the FBI had recordings of their own voices discussing their crimes. The trial, September through November 1986. Before trial, 2 defendants were eliminated, and Yellow Della Croce died of brain cancer on December 2, 1985. Paul Castellano was murdered outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan on December 16, 1985, shot dead on orders from John Gotti, who wanted control of the Gambino family. Philip Rostelli was severed from the case to be tried separately on different RICO charges. 8 defendants remained: Salerno, Corallo, Persico, Santoro, Fanari, Langella, Scopo, and Indelicato. The trial began in September 1986 at the United States District Court in Manhattan. Judge Richard Owen presided. U.S. Attorney Michael Chartoff led the prosecution. He called 207 witnesses. The courtroom was packed every day, standing room only. This was the biggest mob trial in history. Persico decided to represent himself. He had legal advisor Frank Lopez assisting him, but Persico questioned witnesses and addressed the jury directly. In his opening statement, Persico spoke to the jury like they were his friends. Be wary of prosecution witnesses. They are being paid with your money and my freedom. They are powerful, not me. I'm sure after you hear all the evidence, you will acquit me. The jury listened politely. Then the tapes started playing. The evidence. Voices convicting themselves. The government played 150 tape recordings. Salerno and Corallo discussing construction rackets. Langella coordinating labor union control. The bosses dividing money from concrete contracts. One tape captured Salerno and Corallo complaining about younger mobsters who didn't show proper respect. I know you'll retire, Corallo told Salerno sympathetically. Salerno vented about an underling who called him fat too, not even using his full nickname. Corallo's solution? Shoot him. Get rid of him. Shoot him. Kill him. It's disgusting. Another recording caught Salerno reviewing a list of candidates to be made men in another family. When he noticed the list didn't include their nicknames, Salerno said, "I'll leave this up to the boss." Prosecutors seized on that line. Salerno referred to someone else as the boss. He wasn't really in charge, but it didn't matter. He was still running criminal operations. The defense attorneys had reviewed the evidence before trial. They knew their clients were doomed, so they tried a new strategy. They admitted the Mafia existed. They admitted the commission existed, but they argued that membership alone wasn't criminal. This was shocking. For decades, mobsters had denied the Mafia's existence under oath. Now, in open court, defense lawyers were acknowledging it. The defendants were furious. They believed it violated omerta. The code is silence. But their lawyers explained, you can't credibly deny the Mafia exists when the jury is listening to you discuss it on tape. The defendants agreed, as long as they didn't have to personally admit anything on the stand. The star witness was Angelo Leonardo, underboss of the Cleveland crime family. He'd become a cooperating witness. He testified about commission meetings, how decisions were made, how the families operated. This was unprecedented. The highest-ranking mobster ever to testify against the commission. Under cross-examination, defense attorneys attacked his credibility. They pointed out his previous perjury convictions. Leonardo acknowledged his past lies. Right now, I'm telling the truth. The jury believed them. After 6 days of deliberation, they returned their verdict on November 19, 1986. Guilty on all 151 counts. All 8 defendants convicted. The sentences: January 13, 1987. Judge Richard Owen scheduled sentencing for January 13, 1987. The courtroom was packed again. Defendants, lawyers, prosecution, FBI agents, reporters, family members. Owen addressed the defendants one by one. Anthony "Fat Tony" Salerno, you have essentially spent a lifetime terrorizing the community for your financial advantage. 100 years. Carmine Jr. Persico, you are an upper member of the Mafia echelon that lives and succeeds on murder and violence. 100 years. Antonio "Tony Ducks" Corallo, 100 years. Gennaro "Jerry" Langer, 100 years. Salvatore "Tom" Mix, 100 years. Christopher "Christy" Tix Finari, 100 years. Ralph "Little" Ralphie Scopo, 100 years. Anthony Bruno Indelicato, 40 years for murder. 7 100-year sentences, 1 40-year sentence. Total 740 years. Judge Owen recommended all be denied parole. The mob bosses sat stone-faced, no emotion, no reaction. After sentencing, the defendants were taken to a holding area. Their lawyers had arranged the final meal, Italian food and wine. They sat together one last time, eating, drinking, toasting. Tony Corallo raised his glass. Cent'anni, 100 years, the traditional Italian toast, meaning may we live 100 years. Salvatore Santoro laughed. I think it's time to get a new toast. Everyone laughed. Dark humor. They'd each just been sentenced to 100 years. Fat Tony Salerno raised his glass. Maybe I should tell him where the $5 million is buried. More laughter. Then silence. They finished their meal. The guards came. The bosses were taken to federal prison. None would ever be free again. The aftermath. What one bug destroyed. The commission trial broke the New York Mafia. Fat Tony Salerno died in prison in 1992 at age 81, 6 years into his sentence. Corallo died in prison in 2000, age 87, 14 years into his sentence. Junior Persico died in prison in 2019, age 85, 32 years into his sentence. Santoro died in prison in 1997. Finari died in 2015 after being released on medical grounds. Scopo died in 1993. Langella was released in 2014 after serving 28 years. Only Indelicato, with the shortest sentence, was eventually released and is still alive. The 5 families never recovered. The commission stopped meeting. The organizational structure that Lucky Luciano created in 1931 was finished. John Gotti tried to revive Gambino family power, but was himself convicted under RICO in 1992. He died in prison. The Chicago outfit, Philadelphia mob, New England families all faced similar RICO prosecutions through the 1980s and 90s. The FBI had proven that electronic surveillance could destroy even the most careful criminal organizations. The mob had operated with near impunity for 60 years. The commission trial ended that in one case. 740 years in sentences, based primarily on bugs the FBI planted starting in June 1983. Vincent "the Fish" Cafaro, Salerno's right-hand man, turned informant shortly after the conviction. He revealed that Salerno had never been the real boss. Vincent "the Chin" Giganti had been running the Genovese family since 1969, using Salerno as a front. The FBI had been wrong about Salerno, but it didn't matter. He'd still committed the crimes. The sentence stood. Rudolph Giuliani used the commission trial to launch his political career. He became mayor in New York, then ran for president. The prosecutors, FBI agents, and investigators involved became legends in law enforcement. But the real breakthrough wasn't the lawyers or the agents. It was technology. Why the commission failed? For 50 years, the commission operated successfully. They resolved disputes, coordinated crimes, made billions. Their system worked because the bosses were careful. They spoke in code, they avoided paper trails, they never admitted anything. But they made one fatal assumption. They thought their regular meeting places were safe. The Palmer Boys Social Club was Salerno's headquarters for over 20 years. He felt comfortable there. He spoke freely. Corallo thought his Jaguar was secure. Nobody could bug a moving car. He discussed business during rides around the city. Castellano thought his home was private. He held commission meetings in his dining room. They were wrong about all of it. By the early 1980s, the FBI had sophisticated electronic surveillance technology. Microphones small enough to hide anywhere. Transmitters that could broadcast conversations blocks away. Recording equipment that captured thousands of hours. The mob was still operating like it was 1950. The FBI was operating in 1985. That gap destroyed him. The commission trial proved that traditional mob caution, speaking in code, avoiding phone calls, meeting in person, was no longer enough. If the FBI could plant bugs in your social club, your car, your home, your union office, nowhere was safe. The bosses learned this too late. June 1983. The FBI planted a bug in the Palmer Boys Social Club. January 13, 1987. 7 mob bosses received 100-year sentences. 3 years and 6 months. That's how long it took for electronic surveillance to destroy the most powerful criminal organization in American history. The commission had ruled New York for over 50 years. They survived law enforcement crackdowns, internal wars, and federal investigations. But they couldn't survive technology. Fat Tony Salerno sat at his back table in East Harlem for 20 years, conducting business, settling disputes, running a multi-million-dollar gambling empire. He never knew the FBI was listening. When the tapes played in court, Salerno heard his own voice, discussing concrete rackets, complaining about disrespectful soldiers, dividing illegal profits. His own words convicted him. That's what the commission trial proved. In the modern age, there were no safe spaces. The places you feel most comfortable, your headquarters, your car, your home, those are exactly where you're most vulnerable. The FBI understood that. The mob bosses didn't. And that's why one bug in a 990-square-foot social club generated 740 years in prison sentences and destroyed the New York Mafia forever. March 23, 2023, Charlotte, North Carolina. Terry Rozier, starting guard for the Charlotte Hornets, walked onto the court at Spectrum Center. His team was playing in New Orleans Pelicans. Rozier was averaging 18 points per game that season. The betting public had action on his performance, over-under on points, assists, minutes played. 9 minutes into the first quarter, Rozier grabbed his head, signaled to the bench. He was done for the night. Head injury, out of the game. The bets on Rozier's unders, wages that he'd performed below expectations, paid out handsomely. Over $200,000 in wages, tens of thousands in profit. Hours later, a childhood friend drove through the night from the arena to Rozier's house, carrying cash. They counted the money together. What Terry Rozier didn't know, the FBI was already watching, building a case, documenting everything. And what they found wasn't just one player faking an injury for gambling profits. It was a nationwide conspiracy involving NBA stars, Hall of Fame coaches, 4 Mafia families, and tens of millions of dollars in rigged games and underground poker operations. This is the story of Operation Royal Flush, how the FBI spent years tracking NBA insiders who sold game information to gamblers. How Hall of Famer Chauncey Billups helped the Mafia rig poker games with X-ray tables and mock cards. And how 34 people across 11 states were arrested in October 2025 in one of the biggest sports corruption cases since sports betting became legal. The FBI called it insider trading for the NBA. And it all started with one player who couldn't resist easy money. The beginning, when sports betting became legal. 2018, United States Supreme Court. The court struck down the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, the federal law that had banned sports betting in most states since 1992. Suddenly, states could legalize sports gambling. Within months, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and others launched legal sports books. You could walk into a casino or open an app on your phone and bet on NBA games, NFL games, baseball, hockey, everything. The sports leagues had fought against legalization for years. They argued it would lead to corruption, game fixing, insider betting, but the money was too good to resist. By 2025, 38 states plus Washington, D.C. had legalized some form of sports betting. The industry generated over $10 billion in annual revenue. The NBA embraced it. They partnered with sportsbook companies, FanDuel, DraftKings, MGM. Advertisements during games, odds displayed during broadcasts. It was everywhere. But legalizing sports betting created a mess of vulnerability. Inside information. If you knew a player was injured before it was publicly announced, you could bet accordingly and win big. If you knew a star would sit out, you could bet the other team to cover the spread. If you knew someone would leave a game early, you could bet the under on their statistics. The sports books prohibited betting based on non-public information, but how would they know? And that's where players, coaches, and associates saw an opportunity. Jontay Porter, the first domino. January 26, 2024, Los Angeles, California. The Toronto Raptors played the Los Angeles Clippers. Jontay Porter, a 24-year-old center for the Raptors, was on the injury report as questionable, but he was expected to play. Before the game, Porter told his associate, Long Fi Pham, "I'm going to leave early. Fake an injury, exit in the first half." Pham passed the information to Shane Hannon, known in gambling circles as Sugar. Hannon ran a network of straw bettors, people who place bets on behalf of others to avoid detection. The bettors placed massive wagers on Porter's unders. He'd score fewer points than expected, fewer rebounds, fewer assists. Porter played 4 minutes, then he left the game claiming illness. The bets paid out. 2 months later, he did it again. March 20th, 2024, the Raptors played Sacramento. Porter, again, told his associates he'd leave early. They placed bets on his underperformance. Porter played 3 minutes, left the game claiming eye injury. The bets paid out again. But there was a problem. The sports books noticed. When a player suddenly exits a game early and massive bets on their underperformance win, it raises red flags, especially when it happens twice. The sportsbooks reported suspicious activity to the NBA. The NBA launched an investigation. Within weeks, the NBA banned Jontay Porter for life, permanent removal from professional basketball. The FBI opened a criminal investigation. Porter was arrested, charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud. In July 2024, he pleaded guilty. He admitted in federal court that he'd manipulated his performance to benefit gamblers. He admitted he'd done it to pay off his own gambling debts. Porter had been betting on NBA games himself, including betting against his own team. Porter is scheduled to be sentenced in December 2025. He faces up to 4 years in federal prison. But Porter was just the beginning. The FBI investigation, dubbed Nothing But Net, expanded. They discovered Porter wasn't working alone, and the conspiracy went far beyond one player faking injuries. Terry Rozier, the star player. 2022 through 2024, multiple NBA cities. Terry Rozier had a problem. Not on the court, he was a successful NBA guard, 11th year in the league. He'd averaged nearly 14 points per game over 665 career games. He'd been a key contributor to Boston Celtics playoff runs. He'd earned millions in salary. But he had childhood friends, associates from his old neighborhood, people he'd known since growing up. One was De Niro Lasta, known as Nero or Peso. According to the FBI, Lasta approached Rozier with a proposition. Give us inside information about when you leave games early, we'll bet your unders. When the bets pay, we'll share the profits. Easy money. Rozier agreed. Between December 2022 and March 2024, Rozier allegedly provided inside information about at least 7 NBA games. The scheme worked like this. Before the game, Rozier would tell Lasta or another associate that he planned to leave early, fake an injury, limit his playing time. The associates would pass the information to bettors. Eric Ernest, known as Spook, Marvis Fairley, known as Vez or Vezino Lax, and Shane Hannon, the same sugar who'd worked with Jonte Porter. The bettors would place massive wagers through online sports books or retail betting outlets, hundreds of thousands of dollars on Rozier's underperformance. Rozier would execute the plan, leave the game early with a supposed injury, or just play poorly. The bets would pay out. The associates would collect the winnings, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars per game. Then they'd drive to Rozier's house, count the cash together, split the profits. The most egregious example? March 23, 2023, Charlotte Hornets versus New Orleans Pelicans. Rozier told Lasta before the game, "I'm leaving in the first quarter, head injury." Lasta and the betting network placed over $200,000 in wagers on Rozier's unders. Rozier played exactly 9 minutes, then he signaled to the bench, grabbed his head, and left the game. The bets paid off, tens of thousands in profit. Lasta collected the cash and drove through the night to Rozier's home. They counted the money together. Sportsbooks had already flagged that game for irregular betting activity. The volume of underbets on Rozier was suspicious. The timing, placed just before the game, was suspicious. But proving fraud was difficult until the FBI investigation expanded. Then information broker, 1998 through 2009, NBA career. Damon Jones was a role player, 11 years in the league, multiple teams. Most notably, he was part of the Cleveland Cavaliers' 2016 championship team. After retiring, Jones stayed connected to the NBA. He worked as a coach and unofficial advisor. He maintained relationships with players, coaches, and team personnel. And he used those relationships to gather insider information. February 9th, 2023, Los Angeles Lakers game. Jones allegedly obtained non-public information about Lakers players and sold it to co-conspirators. Lineup decisions, medical information not yet released publicly. The bettors used the information to place significant wagers. January 15, 2024, Lakers versus Oklahoma City Thunder. Jones sold information about a Lakers player identified in court documents only as Player 4 being injured before the game. The information wasn't public yet. The injury wouldn't appear on the official NBA injury report for hours. A bettor placed a $100,000 wager against the Lakers based on Jones's tip. But there was a problem. Player 4, widely believed to be Anthony Davis based on the injury report from that date, played anyway. He performed well. The Lakers won. The bettor was furious. He'd paid $2,500 for the tip, then placed a massive bet that lost. He demanded a refund from Jones. Jones refused. The bettor kept records of everything. Those records would later become evidence in the FBI investigation. Jones allegedly sold insider information on numerous occasions. Every time he learned something valuable, an injury, a lineup change, a player's availability, he'd pass it to his network of bettors. He wasn't playing in the games. He wasn't faking injuries. He was an information broker, using his NBA connections to gather intelligence, then selling it for profit. Chauncey Billups, the face card. 2019 through 2024 Underground Poker Games. Chauncey Billups had a Hall of Fame career, 17 years as an NBA player, 5-time All-Star, NBA Finals MVP in 2004 when the Detroit Pistons defeated the Lakers. After retiring, Billups became a coach. He was named head coach of the Portland Trail Blazers in 2021. But Billups had another side business, underground poker. According to federal prosecutors, Billups was what the Mafia calls a face card, a celebrity used to attract fish to rigged poker games. Here's how it worked. The Mafia, specifically members and associates of the Bonanno, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese crime families, organized high-stakes poker games in Manhattan, Las Vegas, Miami, and the Hamptons. They recruited celebrities to sit at the table, famous athletes, recognizable names, people that wealthy marks would want to play against. Chauncey Billups was one of those celebrities. Damon Jones, the same former NBA player who was selling insider betting information, was another. The games looked legitimate. You'd sit down to play poker with an NBA Hall of Famer. How could that be rigged? But the games were elaborately rigged. The conspirators used sophisticated cheating technology, shuffling machines that could read cards in the deck and transmit information about who had the best hand, poker chip tray analyzers with hidden cameras, special contact lenses and glasses that could read pre-marked cards, X-ray tables that revealed cards placed face down. Someone sitting at the table, working with the cheaters, would receive signals about other players' hands. They'd know exactly when to bet, fold, or raise. The marks, the victims, never had a chance. According to prosecutors, victims lost at least $7.15 million in these rigged games since 2019. April 9th, 2019, Vegas poker game. Billups was playing at a rigged table. The organizers had arranged for Billups to win, to make the game look legitimate and keep him involved. But Billups started winning too much, too many improbable hands. The organizers panicked. If Billups kept winning, the marks would get suspicious. The game would fall apart. They signaled to Billups to ease off, let some hands go, make it look more realistic. Billups wasn't just a celebrity lure. According to prosecutors, he was part of the cheating team, actively participating in defrauding the victims.
The aftermath, immediate consequences. Within hours of the arrests, the NBA acted. Terry Rozier, placed on immediate leave from the Miami Heat. He did not play in the team's season opener on October 23rd. Chauncey Billups, placed on immediate leave from the Portland Trail Blazers. Assistant coach Thiago Splitter assumed interim head coaching duties. The NBA released a statement. We are in the process of reviewing the federal indictments announced today. Terry Rozier and Chauncey Billups are being placed on immediate leave from their teams, and we will continue to cooperate with the relevant authorities. NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch called the joint indictment extraordinarily rare, highlighting that 4 of the 5 New York Mafia families were involved. NYFBI Assistant Director Christopher Raya said this alleged collusion resulted in the defendants secretly pocketing their lavish winnings and corrupting NBA games. Razier's attorney issued a statement denying wrongdoing. Terry was cleared by the NBA, and these prosecutors revived that non-case. Terry's not a gambler, but he's not afraid of a fight, and he looks forward to winning this fight. Billups has not publicly commented. His attorneys have not released statements. All defendants are presumed innocent until proven guilty. Trials are expected to begin in 2026, but the damage is already done. The pattern: sports betting corruption. The NBA gambling arrests are part of a larger pattern. Since the Supreme Court legalized sports betting in 2018, at least 23 professional players and coaches have been suspended or permanently banned from their leagues for gambling violations. Jonte Porter, banned for life by the NBA in 2024. 2 Cleveland Guardians pitchers, Emmanuel Clase and Luis Ortiz, have been on paid leave since July 2025 due to a Major League Baseball probe of sports betting. Multiple NFL players have faced suspensions for betting violations. College athletes have been caught betting on games, including their own teams. Former NBA player and New York Knicks star turned Senator Bill Bradley, a key architect of the 1992 law that banned sports betting, warned in 2024, "I just don't think it will be controlled. I think there will be a scandal." He was right. The problem is simple. Inside information is incredibly valuable in sports betting. If you know a star player is injured, you can bet accordingly. If you know someone will sit out, you can beat the spread. If you know a player will underperform, you can win big on underbets. And the temptation is enormous. Players earn millions in salary, but they have friends from childhood, associates who need money, family members who want a piece. It's easy to rationalize. I'm just giving my boy some info. It's not like I'm shaving points at throwing games. But it is illegal. Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. And when the FBI gets involved, careers end.
The Mafia connection. Why the La Cosa Nostra still matters. The poker rigging scheme reveals something important. The Mafia is still operational. For decades, law enforcement has claimed organized crime is dying. The commission trial in the 1980s, RICO prosecutions through the 90s and 2000s, informants flipping, bosses dying in prison. The New York families were supposedly finished. But the 2025 indictments prove otherwise. 4 families, Bonanno, Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese, backed a multi-million-dollar poker fraud operation. They recruited celebrities. They used sophisticated technology. They laundered millions. This wasn't a bunch of old men running small-time rackets. This was an organized, profitable criminal enterprise. NBC News reported a string of federal operations decades ago nearly decimated New York's major crime families, but they haven't completely gone away. Prosecutors said 12 Mafia associates played roles in the poker scam. The fact that the Mafia could partner with NBA celebrities shows they still have reach, still have connections, still have the infrastructure to run complex fraud schemes. They've adapted. They're not running casinos in Las Vegas anymore. They're not hijacking trucks or controlling unions. They're rigging poker games with x-ray tables, using celebrities as bait, laundering money through gambling operations. It's a modern mob, smaller than the glory days, but still operational, still making millions. The irony: legalization created the crime. Here's the ironic part. The sports betting corruption only exists because gambling became legal. When sports betting was illegal before 2018, players couldn't openly share inside information. There were no legal sports books, no apps, no casinos caking NBA bets. Sure, underground bookies existed, but the market was limited. The betting volumes were smaller. Legalization changed everything. Suddenly, anyone with a smartphone could bet on NBA games. Betting ads were everywhere. The leagues partnered with sports books. The market exploded. Billions of dollars in annual bets. That created massive incentive for inside information. If you knew something others didn't, you could make a fortune. Players and coaches had that information, and they realized we could monetize this. Terry Rozier, looking at $200,000 in bets on his underperformance, knowing tens of thousands in profit would be driven to his house that night, that temptation only existed because legal sports books made it possible. The Mafia's poker operation, using celebrities as bait, that only worked because the celebrities were gambling legally and had connections to wealthy marks who wanted to play. Legalization was supposed to end corruption by bringing gambling into the light, regulated, monitored, controlled. Instead, it created new opportunities for crime. The illegal part isn't the gambling anymore. It's the fraud, the inside information, the rigged games. And as Senator Bradley predicted, I don't think it will be controlled.
The lesson: why nobody wins. Terry Rozier is 30 years old. He'd earned approximately $60 million in NBA salary over his career. He had endorsement deals. He was set for life financially. Why risk it all for tens of thousands in betting profits? Chauncey Billups is 49, Hall of Fame player, successful coach, multi-million-dollar contracts. Why participate in rigged poker games for a share of fraudulent winnings? The answer: they thought they wouldn't get caught. Rozier probably believed the sports books couldn't prove anything. He had a head injury, he left the game, it happens. Billups probably thought the poker games were untraceable, underground games, cash only, no paper trail. They were wrong. The FBI spent years building these cases. They tracked betting patterns, they interviewed witnesses, they followed the money, and in the end, both men faced decades in federal prison. Even if they avoid conviction, if their lawyers can create reasonable doubt, if juries acquit, their careers are over. The NBA has placed them on immediate leave. Even if criminal charges fail, league discipline will follow. Suspensions, fines, possible lifetime bans. Rozier will likely never play another NBA game. Billups will likely never coach again. For what? Some extra cash they didn't need? The Mafia associates who organized the poker games face similar fates. Multi-year federal sentences, asset forfeitures, the end of their criminal enterprises. The bettors who placed the fraudulent wagers, facing money laundering charges, wire fraud charges, years in prison for winning bets based on inside information. Nobody wins, except maybe the sports books, who can now point to these arrests and say, see, we're vigilant, we catch cheaters, sports betting is safe.
But the fundamental problem remains. As long as sports betting is legal and profitable, there will always be temptation to use inside information for profit. And as long as that temptation exists, some players, coaches, and associates will try to exploit it.
October 23rd, 2025, the day Terry Rozier, Chauncey Billups, and 32 others were arrested. The NBA called it a dark day for the league. Commissioner Adam Silver said, "We will cooperate fully with federal authorities to ensure the integrity of our game." But the arrests revealed something the league didn't want to admit. The integrity of the game was already compromised. When a starting NBA guard fakes an injury in the first quarter so his childhood friends can win bets on his underperformance, the game is tainted. When a Hall of Fame coach helps the Mafia rig poker games with X-ray tables and marked cards, the sport's reputation is damaged. When former players sell inside medical information about the Lakers stars for profit, trust is broken. The FBI spent years documenting all of it, building their case, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when they finally moved, 34 arrests across 11 states, the message was clear. If you're using inside information to profit from sports betting, the FBI is watching. If you're helping the Mafia rig games, you will be caught. If you think you're too famous, too connected, too careful to face consequences, Terry Rozier and Chauncey Billups thought the same thing. They were wrong. The sports betting explosion created billions in legal revenue, but it also created billions in temptation. And as Operation Royal Flush proved, when billions are at stake, someone will always try to cheat. The only question is whether they get caught before they destroy their careers. For Terry Rozier, who faked an injury in the first quarter of a meaningless regular season game, the answer is now clear. The FBI heard everything, they documented everything. And on October 23rd, 2025, his career ended not with a championship or a farewell tour, but with federal agents knocking on his door. That's what happens when you bet against your own integrity. You lose everything.
Spring 1978, Kansas City, Missouri. FBI agents crept into the Villa Capri restaurant after closing time. They carried electronic equipment, microphones, transmitters, batteries, small enough to hide, sensitive enough to pick up conversations from across the room. The agents knew exactly where to plant them, the back table, the one reserved every night for Kansas City mob boss Nick Savella and his associates. That table was where business happened, where orders were given, where money changed hands. The FBI planted their bugs and left before sunrise. Nobody noticed. The next night, Nick Savella sat at his usual table. He talked freely about murders, about casino operations, about problems with their Vegas operations. The FBI listened, and what they heard had nothing to do with the murders they were investigating. They heard something bigger, much bigger. They heard mob bosses from 4 cities, Kansas City, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Cleveland, conspiring to steal millions from Las Vegas casinos. This is the story of Operation Strawman, how the FBI bugged 2 mob restaurants, one in Kansas City, one in Milwaukee, how those bugs recorded thousands of hours of conversations, and how 15 mob bosses across the Midwest went to prison for decades based on what the FBI heard at restaurant tables. The mob thought they were untouchable. They ran their businesses from their favorite restaurants for years, until the FBI learned how to listen. The setup, how the mob owned Las Vegas. 1974, Las Vegas, Nevada. The mob had a problem. How do you own a casino when Nevada law says mob figures can't hold gambling licenses? They'd solved this problem years earlier with a simple system. Frontmen. Find someone with a clean record. Give them money to buy a casino, usually millions from the Teamsters Union pension fund. Put them on paper as the owner. But the mob controlled everything. They placed their people in key positions. They made the decisions. They took the profits. And most importantly, they skimmed. Skimming was the bloodline of mob casino operations. Every night, before the official count, trusted operatives removed cash from the counting rooms. Thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands. The money never appeared on official books, never got taxed by Nevada, never reported to the IRS. It went straight to the mob bosses in Kansas City, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Cleveland. Alan Glick was the perfect frontman. Glick was 32 years old, Vietnam veteran, real estate developer from San Diego. Clean record, no mob connections on paper. In 1974, Glick bought the Stardust and Fremont casinos in Las Vegas. The purchase price, $62.7 million. He borrowed the money from the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund, the same fund that had been financing mob operations for decades. But Glick wasn't really in charge. Frank "Lefty" Rosenthal ran the casinos for the mob. Rosenthal was brilliant with numbers, a professional sports handicapper from Chicago with deep mob connections. He couldn't get a gaming license because his mob ties were too obvious. So his official title was entertainment director. But everyone knew he ran the operations. And Rosenthal reported to the bosses, Nick Savella in Kansas City, Joey Aiuppa in Chicago, Frank Balistrieri in Milwaukee, Milton Rockman in Cleveland. These men controlled the skim. They decided how much came out. They divided the profits. From 1974 to 1978, over $2 million was skimmed from the Stardust Casino alone. The FBI suspected this was happening, but they couldn't prove it. Then they got lucky.
The Kansas City bug, when a murder investigation found something bigger. 1978, Kansas City FBI office. Special Agent Bill Owsley ran the organized crime squad. His team was investigating a string of local murders, multiple victims, all connected to the Kansas City mob. Owsley knew Nick Savella, boss of the Kansas City crime family, was involved, but proving it required evidence. Owsley's team decided to plant the bug. The target, Villa Capri Restaurant in northeast Kansas City, a mob hangout. Savella ate there constantly, always at the same back table. Spring 1978, FBI agents executed their plan. They entered Villa Capri after hours, planted microphones at the back table where Savella sat, installed transmitters, set up receivers nearby. The next night, they started listening. Nick Savella sat at his table with his brother Carl Savella and other associates. They talked freely, thinking they were safe in their regular spot. The FBI agents put on their headphones, expecting to hear about the murders. Instead, they heard something else. Las Vegas was the last thing on our minds, Bill Owsley later recalled. But when they sat down that night, they talked about Las Vegas. Savella and his associates discussed casino operations, skimming money, problems with Frank Rosenthal, frustrations with how Las Vegas was being run. The FBI agents looked at each other. They'd stumbled onto something much bigger than murder.
The Milwaukee Connection, Mr. Big at his table. 1960s through early 1980s, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Frank Balistrieri ran the Milwaukee mob from a table at Snug's restaurant. Snug's was located in the Shorecrest Hotel on the east side. Not the fancy, just the neighborhood restaurant. But it was Balistrieri's office.
Every day, Frankie Bao sat at his back table. Associates came to him. They discussed business, gambling operations, loan sharking, vending machine rackets, and their cut from the Las Vegas casinos. Balistreri had become boss of the Milwaukee family in 1961 after his father-in-law, John Aliotta, retired. By the late 1970s, Balistreri controlled illegal gambling across Wisconsin. He had a monopoly on sports betting. He dominated the vending machine business. And he had a piece of the Vegas skim. Balistreri had helped arrange the Teamsters loan for Alan Glick, $62.7 million to buy the Stardust and Fremont. In return, Balistreri got a cut of the skim. His sons worked with him, Joseph and John Balistreri, both lawyers. They handled the business side, kept things looking legitimate. The FBI had been watching Balistreri for years. They knew he was running criminal operations, but proving it was hard. Then, in 1978, they made their move. The FBI planted bugs at Snug's restaurant, at Balistreri's back table. They also wiretapped the Shorecrest Hotel, owned by Joseph Balistreri. Suddenly, the FBI could hear everything. Balistreri's conversations with his sons, discussions about their vending machine extortion racket, arguments about money from Las Vegas. One recorded conversation from February 1980 became legendary. John Balistreri talked to his mother about the IRS. 3 years ago, we ran a bunch of strip clubs and none of them was successful. Today, we're worth $15 million, and you think that sticks in their throat? The family couldn't explain their sudden wealth. The IRS know it, the FBI know it, and now they had it on tape. The sting. Donnie Brasco comes to Milwaukee. 1978. New York City. FBI agent Joseph Pistone was deep undercover as Donnie Brasco, a jewel thief who'd infiltrated the Bonanno crime family. Pistone had spent 5 years building his cover. He'd become friends with wise guys, participated in criminal activity, earned their trust. The FBI decided to use Pistone's credibility for another operation, Milwaukee. The plan was simple. Pistone would introduce an undercover agent working as Tony Conti to Frank Balistreri's operation. Conti would set up a vending machine company. Balistreri would try to extort him, and the FBI would catch it all. On tape. Pistone flew to Milwaukee. He vouched for Tony Conti to Balistreri's crew, said Conti was connected, trustworthy, good for business. The Milwaukee mob took the bait. Conti set up his vending machine company. Balistreri's people approached him, told him he needed to pay a street tax, protection money, to operate in Milwaukee. He refused. Balistreri's associates became more aggressive. They threatened them, made it clear, pay up or face consequences. The FBI recorded everything. On April 10, 1984, Frank Balistreri and his 2 sons were convicted of extortion for trying to take control of the FBI's dummy vending machine company. Frank got 13 years. Joseph and John each got 8 years, later reduced to 5. But that was just the beginning.
Operation Strawman, connecting all the pieces. While the Milwaukee vending machine case proceeded, something bigger was developing. The FBI bugs in Kansas City and Milwaukee had captured thousands of hours of conversations about the Las Vegas skim. The Justice Department's organized crime strike force coordinated with FBI offices across multiple states: Kansas City, Milwaukee, Chicago, Cleveland, Las Vegas. They called it Operation Strawman, named after the frontmen like Alan Glick, who pretended to own the casinos while the mob ran everything behind the scenes. The investigation revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Nick Savella in Kansas City coordinated with Joey Aiuppa in Chicago, the top boss of the Chicago outfit. Frank Balistieri in Milwaukee got his cut. Milton Rockman in Cleveland represented his family's interests. They all answered to one man in Las Vegas, Joe Agosto. Agosto was the entertainment director of the Tropicana Hotel and Casino. He ran the Foley's Bergère show, the famous Showgirl review. But Agosto's real job was overseeing the skim. He controlled how money came out of the counting rooms at the Tropicana. He ensured cash went to Kansas City, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Cleveland. He kept the books. Carl DeLuna, the number 2 man in Kansas City, kept meticulous records of who got what. Every dollar accounted for. Those records would destroy them. The FBI compiled evidence from multiple sources. Thousands of hours of wiretapped restaurant conversations, Carl DeLuna's detailed financial records, testimony from informants, physical surveillance of cash couriers, bank records showing suspicious transactions, the Nevada Gaming Control Board investigations. By 1983, they were ready to move. The indictments, when the hammer fell. September 1983, federal grand jury. 15 major crime figures were indicted for conspiring to skim over $2 million from the Stardust and Fremont casinos. The defendants included, from Chicago, Joey Aiuppa, 75 years old, boss of the Chicago outfit. Jackie Cerrone, 69, underboss. Angelo LaPietra, 62, a capo. Tony Spilatro, 45, the mob's enforcer in Las Vegas. Joseph Lombardo, 54, a high-ranking member. From Milwaukee, Frank Balistieri, 65, the boss. Joseph Balistieri, 43, his lawyer's son. John Balistieri, 34, his other lawyer's son, the family's business manager. From Kansas City, Carl Savella, 72, the boss. Carl DeLuna, 55, the underboss. Peter Tamburello, 51, a soldier. From Cleveland, Milton Rockman, 75, the mob's representative. From Las Vegas, Carl Thomas, 51, a casino operator who facilitated the skim. These weren't street thugs. These were the top bosses and underbosses of 4 major crime families, the leadership of organized crime across the Midwest. Some observers called it the most significant organized crime prosecution in Justice Department history. The charges were serious: conspiracy to skim casino profits, interstate transportation of stolen property, racketeering. If convicted on all counts, each defendant faced up to 40 years in prison and $80,000 in fines. The mob had operated with near impunity for decades. Now, their entire leadership was facing prison, and it all came from conversations at restaurant tables.
The trial, 4 months in Kansas City, September 23, 1985. United States District Court, Kansas City. 9 defendants sat in the courtroom. Some had pleaded guilty or been severed from the main trial. Others were still fighting. Judge Joseph Stevens Jr. presided. The trial lasted 4 months. Chief Prosecutor David Helfrey led the Justice Department's organized crime strike force. His team presented overwhelming evidence: 1,000 documents, over 30 hours of secretly recorded telephone conversations and bugs, testimony from 400 witnesses, mostly FBI agents and police authenticating wiretaps and records. Carl DeLuna's meticulous financial records showing exactly how the skim money was divided.
The wiretap conversations from the Kansas City and Milwaukee restaurants were particularly damning. Jurors heard Nick Savella discussing Vegas operations, Frank Balistieri arguing about his cut, associates complaining about Frank Rosenthal's management of the Stardust. The recordings captured the mob bosses in their own words discussing their criminal enterprise. Some recordings were almost comical. The FBI played tapes of Frank, Joe, and John Balistieri trying to figure out how to explain $200,000 in cash the FBI had seized from the Shorecrest Hotel. The defense argued the government's case was based on circumstantial evidence and flawed interpretations of casual conversations. But the evidence was overwhelming. January 1986, the jury reached its verdict. 5 defendants were convicted: Joey Aiuppa, Jackie Cherone, Frank Balistieri, Angelo LaPietra, and Carl DeLuna. The others were either acquitted or had already pleaded guilty to lesser charges. The convictions were major victories, but the sentences were even more significant. Joey Aiuppa, 28 years in prison. The 77-year-old boss to the Chicago outfit would die in prison. Jackie Cherone, 28 years. The Chicago underboss, age 71, also died while incarcerated. Frank Balistieri, 10 years to run concurrently with his previous 13-year sentence for the vending machine extortion. He served 7 years total and was released in 1991. He died in 1993, 2 years after release. The other defendants received similar sentences, decades in federal prison. But the impact went far beyond these 5 convictions. The Tropicana case, the other half a straw man. While the Stardust case proceeded, the FBI had been building a parallel case. The Tropicana Hotel and Casino was also being skimmed. Joe Agosto controlled that operation. In 1981, a Kansas City grand jury indicted Agosto, Nick Savella, Carl Savella, Carl DeLuna, and Carl Thomas for skimming $280,000 from the Tropicana. The defendants went to trial in 1983. All were convicted. Nick Savella, the boss of Kansas City, died of cancer in 1983, just after his conviction. He never served his prison sentence. But the Tropicana convictions, combined with the Stardust convictions, effectively destroyed the Kansas City mob. In total, Operation Strawman resulted in 19 convictions of senior mobsters across 4 crime families: Kansas City, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Cleveland. The investigation virtually eliminated the leadership of organized crime across the Midwest. The aftermath, how Strawman changed everything. The impact of Operation Strawman went far beyond the convictions. First, it broke the mob's control of Las Vegas. Alan Glick, the frontman who'd bought the Stardust, was forced out by Nevada gaming officials. The Stardust and other mob-connected casinos were sold to religious owners. The skimming operations that had funneled millions to mob families for decades were finished. Second, it demonstrated the power of electronic surveillance. The bugs planted at Villa Capri in Kansas City and Snugs in Milwaukee captured thousands of hours of incriminating conversations. The wiretaps on hotels and businesses provided additional evidence. This was the first time the FBI had so successfully used long-term electronic surveillance to dismantle multiple organized crime families simultaneously. The straw man investigation became the model for future RICO cases. Third, it proved that mob bosses could be prosecuted. For decades, the top bosses had insulated themselves from prosecution. They gave orders indirectly, they never got their hands dirty, they maintained plausible deniability. But the bugs captured them speaking freely, planning crimes, discussing the skim, dividing profits. Their own voices convicted them. Fourth, it ended an era. The mob families that controlled the Midwest for decades were gutted. The Kansas City family never recovered. After Nick Savella's death and the strawman convictions, the family essentially ceased to exist as an independent organization. The Chicago outfit survived, but diminished.
Joey Iupa and Jackie Chiron, their top leaders, died in prison. The outfit never regained its Las Vegas operations. The Milwaukee family was absorbed by Chicago after Frank Balistieri's death in 1993. It no longer exists as an independent organization. The Cleveland family faced similar prosecution and decline. Operation Strawman, more than any other case, broke the back of Midwest organized crime.
The irony, when safe spaces became traps. For decades, mob bosses conducted business in restaurants. It made sense. Restaurants were public spaces. Hard to prove anything criminal was happening. They were social. Eating together looked innocent. They provided privacy, a back table away from other diners. Nick Savella felt safe at Villa Capri. He went there every night, always sat at the same table, discussed business freely. Frank Balistieri felt safe at Snuggs. It was his office, his territory. He'd been conducting business from that back table for years without problems. These restaurants were where they felt most comfortable, most in control. That comfort made them careless. They spoke openly, discussed specific dollar amounts, named names, detailed exactly how the skim worked. They never imagined the FBI was listening. The bugs were small, invisible. The technology was sophisticated enough to pick up conversations across the room. By the time the mob bosses realized they'd been compromised, it was too late. Thousands of hours recorded, evidence enough to convict dozens of people. The places where they felt safest became the evidence that destroyed them. The lesson: why the mob lost Vegas. The mob controlled Las Vegas for over 30 years. They built the casinos. They ran the operations. They skimmed millions in untaxed profits. But they lost it all because they couldn't adapt. First, they relied on old methods: restaurant meetings, in-person conversations, face-to-face business. The FBI adapted faster. They developed electronic surveillance technology. They learned how to bug restaurants without being detected. They built cases using the mob's own words against them. Second, the mob couldn't operate legally. Once Nevada started enforcing gaming regulations, banning known mobsters, investigating casino ownership, auditing finances, the mob couldn't compete. They needed frontmen, hidden ownership, skimming operations, all of which created vulnerabilities. Frontmen who could flip, financial records that could be subpoenaed, evidence trails that investigators could follow. And third, the mob attracted law enforcement attention. The FBI dedicated enormous resources to Operation Strawman, multiple field offices, years of surveillance, coordination with the Justice Department's organized crime strike force. Why? Because taking down mob control of Vegas was a priority. The mob's infiltration of legitimate businesses, casinos, unions, even pension funds threatened the entire Nevada economy. Once law enforcement committed to ending mob control, it was only a matter of time. And fourth, the mob's own structure betrayed them. They kept detailed records, like Carl DeLuna's meticulous book showing who got what from the skim. They held regular meetings, making it easy for the FBI to know where and when to plant bugs. They trusted too many people, creating opportunities for informants and flipped associates. The very things that made the mob successful, organization, record keeping, hierarchy, became the tools that destroyed them.
Operation Strawman stands as one of the most successful organized crime investigations in FBI history. 2 restaurant bugs, one in Kansas City at Villa Capri, one in Milwaukee at Snuggs, captured thousands of hours of mob conversations. Those conversations revealed a massive conspiracy to skim over $2 million from Las Vegas casinos. 19 senior mobsters were convicted. The leadership of 4 crime families was destroyed. The mob's control of Las Vegas ended. All because the FBI learned to listen. Nick Savella thought his back table at Villa Capri was safe. Frank Balistrieri thought his table at Snuggs was secure. They were wrong. The FBI proved that in the modern age, there's no such thing as a safe space for criminals. Not when technology allows law enforcement to hear everything. The mob bosses spent decades building their Vegas empire. They perfected the skim. They made millions. But they lost it all because they talked too freely at their favorite restaurants. If you want to understand how the FBI dismantled organized crime's control of Las Vegas, how electronic surveillance revolutionized law enforcement, Operation Strawman is where you start, because it proves a simple truth. Your safe space is only safe until someone's listening. And in 1978, when the FBI planted bugs at 2 mob restaurants, the Midwest Mafia's days were numbered. They just didn't know it yet.
1936, Jacksonville, Florida. A well-dressed man stepped off a plane from New York. He wore an expensive suit. His hair was perfectly styled. He'd spent an hour at the barber that morning. He carried a small suitcase with a clean shirt. Local mobsters met him at the airport. Easy job, they said. Guy leaves his house same time every day, 11 a.m. You can't miss. The man from New York, they called him Pittsburgh Phil, nodded. But he wasn't happy. Because Pittsburgh Phil was a professional, the most feared contract killer in America. A man who'd murdered over 100 people across a dozen states. And these local guys had no idea how he worked. Phil never carried a gun, never brought weapons on planes, never walked around armed. If cops picked him up, they'd find nothing. No gun, no knife, no rope, no ice pick. Just a well-dressed man with a suitcase. But that didn't matter, because when Pittsburgh Phil arrived in your city, someone was gonna die. He'd just use whatever he found. This is the story of Harry Strauss, the man they called Pittsburgh Phil. How a Brooklyn kid became Murder Incorporated's top hitman. How he killed more people than any contract killer in American history. And how he did it all without ever carrying a weapon. Until one of his own friends decided he'd rather talk than die. The Brooklyn Kid Who Loved Murder. 1909, Brooklyn, New York. Harry Strauss was born July 28th in the Brownsville section, a neighborhood packed with Jewish and Italian immigrants, tenement buildings, and grinding poverty. His friends called him Pep, short for Peppy. Always energetic, always moving, always looking for action. By age 12, Strauss was committing petty crimes, shoplifting, pickpocketing, small-time stuff. By his teens, he'd graduated to serious crime, assault, larceny, drug dealing. Between 1926 and 1939, Strauss was arrested 18 times. Assault, burglary, possession of stolen goods, carrying concealed weapons. 18 arrests, 0 convictions. Years later, prosecutor Burton Turkis, the man who finally sent Strauss to the electric chair, would say Strauss had never been convicted of so much as smoking on a subway platform. How did he avoid conviction? Simple. Strauss was smart, careful. He never got caught with evidence. and he developed a personal rule that would define his entire career. Never carry a weapon unless you're about to use it. If cops stopped him on the street, searched him, brought him in, they'd find nothing. Clean suit, clean record, technically. No proof. This philosophy made Strauss nearly untouchable, and it made him valuable to a new kind of criminal organization taking shape in Brooklyn. Murder Incorporated, the Mafia's firing squad. 1930, Brooklyn. The American Mafia was changing. The old ways, territorial wars, constant violence, disorganized chaos were giving way to something new. Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, and other mob bosses created the Commission, a ruling body that would oversee organized crime across America. The families would stop fighting each other. They'd divide territories, cooperate, build a national crime syndicate. But the commission needed enforcers. When a boss ordered a hit, who would carry it out? That's where Murder Incorporated was born. Based in Brownsville, Brooklyn, Murder Inc. was essentially the enforcement arm of the National Crime Syndicate, a group of contract killers who would murder anyone, anywhere, on orders from the bosses. The operation was run by Louis Lepke Balcolta, Albert Anastasia, and other top mobsters. They recruited killers from the streets of Brooklyn, men who'd proven they could kill without hesitation or remorse. Harry Strauss was exactly what they were looking for. By the early 1930s, Strauss had joined Murder Inc., and he quickly became their star. Why? Because Strauss loved killing. Most hitmen saw murder as business, a job, something you did because the boss ordered it. Strauss saw it as art. He once told a friend, "Like a ball player, that's me. I figure I get seasoning doing these jobs here. Somebody from one of the big mobs spots me. Then up to the big leagues." Strauss viewed himself as a professional athlete, practicing his craft, getting better with each kill, working his way up to the major leagues of murder. And he was good. Very good.
The method: killing without weapons. Here's how Pittsburgh Phil worked. When Murder Inc. got a contract, in order to kill someone, they'd assign it to their killers. Sometimes multiple guys, sometimes just one. Strauss preferred working alone or with one partner. Less people meant less risk of mistakes. The bosses would give him a name, a location, maybe a description. That's all he needed. Strauss would pack his suitcase, one clean shirt, socks, underwear, nothing suspicious. No gun, no knife, no weapons of any kind. He'd hop on a train or plane to wherever the target was. Detroit, Florida, Connecticut, California. Murder Inc. sent killers all over the country. When Strauss arrived, he'd scout the location, watch the target, learn their routine, find the right moment. And then he'd look for a weapon. Whatever was available, whatever fit the situation. An ice pick left on a bar, a rope in a garage, a fire axe on a theater wall. Anything could become a murder weapon in Pittsburgh Phil's hands. This method had huge advantages. First, the cops couldn't connect the weapon to Strauss. He never touched it before the murder. No fingerprints, no purchase records, no way to trace it back to him. Second, if police stopped him before the hit, they'd find nothing. He wasn't breaking any laws, just a well-dressed man visiting the city. Third, the randomness made his kills harder to solve. Different methods, different weapons, no pattern. Each murder looked unconnected to the others.
Strauss reportedly killed over 100 men. Some historians put the number as high as 500, using this exact approach. And for years, he never got caught. The kills, a professional at work. 1932, Brooklyn. Murder Inc. wanted a man named Puggy Feinstein dead. Feinstein was a small-time hood who'd become a problem. Maybe he was skimming. Maybe he knew too much. The reason didn't matter. Strauss and a few associates lured Feinstein to a house in Brooklyn, told him they had business to discuss. When Feinstein walked in, Strauss shoved him onto a couch. Then Strauss grabbed an ice pick, just sitting there on a table, and went to work. He stabbed Feinstein in the chest, the neck, the face, over and over. The medical examiner's report documented 63 stab wounds, 13 on the neck between the jaw and collarbone, 50 on the right chest, every single one from an ice pick. But Feinstein fought back. He bit down hard on Strauss's pinky finger, almost severing it. Strauss was furious. "Give me a rope," he said. "I'll fix this bum." Someone found clothesline. Strauss wrapped it around Feinstein's neck, tied the other end to his feet, trussing him up like a turkey. They watched as Feinstein struggled, slowly strangling himself to death. When he finally stopped moving, they dragged the body to a vacant lot and set it on fire. The medical examiner concluded death was caused by multiple stab wounds and asphyxia due to strangulation. Strauss's pinky never fully healed. For the rest of his life, that mangled finger reminded him of the one time a victim fought back. Another time, Strauss was sent to Florida to kill a local mobster causing problems. When Strauss arrived, the local hoods told him it would be easy. Guy leaves his house same time every day. But Strauss wasn't impressed. The house was on a busy street, 11 in the morning, broad daylight, lots of witnesses, no escape route. Strauss followed the target all day, watched him eat lunch, shadowed him everywhere. Finally, the guy went into a crowded movie theater. Strauss followed him inside. No weapon on him. He never carried one. He looked around for something he could use. There, mounted on the wall, a fire axe. Perfect. Strauss planned it out. He'd grab the axe, sink it into his head in a dark theater. In the chaos, he'd run out with the panicked crowd. Nobody would notice him, just another frightened moviegoer fleeing the violence. Classic Pittsburgh Phil brilliance. But then, the target did something unexpected. He jumped up and moved to a different seat, a seat hopper. Strauss waited. The guy moved again. For Strauss, that was it. The job was bad, too unpredictable. He left the theater, flew back to Brooklyn, and told his bosses he couldn't do it. This was remarkable. Strauss, who loved killing, who volunteered for hits, walked away from a job because the conditions weren't right. That's what made him a professional. He didn't just kill recklessly, he killed when he could do it right. The method: killing without weapons. Here's how Pittsburgh Phil worked. When Murder Inc. got a contract, in order to kill someone, they'd assign it to their killers. Sometimes multiple guys, sometimes just one. Strauss preferred working alone or with one partner. Less people meant less risk of mistakes. The bosses would give him a name, a location, maybe a description. That's all he needed. Strauss would pack his suitcase, one clean shirt, socks, underwear, nothing suspicious. No gun, no knife, no weapons of any kind. He'd hop on a train, a plane, to wherever the target was. Detroit, Florida, Connecticut, California. Murder Inc. sent killers all over the country. When Strauss arrived, he'd scout the location, watch the target, learn their routine, find the right moment, and then he'd look for a weapon. Whatever was available, whatever fit the situation. An ice pick left on a bar, a rope in a garage, a fire axe on a theater wall. Anything could become a murder weapon in Pittsburgh Phil's hands. This method had huge advantages. First, the cops couldn't connect the weapon to Strauss. He never touched it before the murder. No fingerprints, no purchase records, no way to trace it back to him. Second, if police stopped him before the hit, they'd find nothing. He wasn't breaking any laws, just a well-dressed man visiting the city. Third, the randomness made his kills harder to solve. Different methods, different weapons, no pattern. Each murder looked unconnected to the others. Strauss reportedly killed over 100 men. Some historians put the number as high as 500, using this exact approach. And for years, he never got caught. The kills, a professional at work. 1932, Brooklyn. Murder Inc. wanted a man named Puggy Feinstein dead. Feinstein was a small-time hood who'd become a problem. Maybe he was skimming. Maybe he knew too much. The reason didn't matter. Strauss and a few associates lured Feinstein to a house in Brooklyn, told him they had business to discuss. When Feinstein walked in, Strauss shoved him onto a couch. Then Strauss grabbed an ice pick, just sitting there on a table, and went to work. He stabbed Feinstein in the chest, the neck, the face, over and over. The medical examiner's report documented 63 stab wounds, 13 on the neck between the jaw and collarbone, 50 on the right chest, every single one from an ice pick. But Feinstein fought back. He bit down hard on Strauss's pinky finger, almost severing it. Strauss was furious. "Give me a rope," he said. "I'll fix this bum." Someone found clothesline. Strauss wrapped it around Feinstein's neck, tied the other end to his feet, trussing him up like a turkey. They watched as Feinstein struggled, slowly strangling himself to death. When he finally stopped moving, they dragged the body to a vacant lot and set it on fire. The medical examiner concluded death was caused by multiple stab wounds and asphyxia due to strangulation. Strauss's pinky never fully healed. For the rest of his life, that mangled finger reminded him of the one time a victim fought back. Another time, Strauss was sent to Florida to kill a local mobster causing problems. When Strauss arrived, the local hoods told him it would be easy. Guy leaves his house same time every day. But Strauss wasn't impressed. The house was on a busy street, 11 in the morning, broad daylight, lots of witnesses, no escape route. Strauss followed the target all day, watched him eat lunch, shadowed him everywhere. Finally, the guy went into a crowded movie theater. Strauss followed him inside. No weapon on him. He never carried one. He looked around for something he could use. There, mounted on the wall, a fire axe. Perfect. Strauss planned it out. He'd grab the axe, sink it into his head in a dark theater. In the chaos, he'd run out with the panicked crowd. Nobody would notice him, just another frightened moviegoer fleeing the violence. Classic Pittsburgh Phil brilliance. But then, the target did something unexpected. He jumped up and moved to a different seat, a seat hopper. Strauss waited. The guy moved again. For Strauss, that was it. The job was bad, too unpredictable. He left the theater, flew back to Brooklyn, and told his bosses he couldn't do it. This was remarkable. Strauss, who loved killing, who volunteered for hits, walked away from a job because the conditions weren't right. That's what made him a professional. He didn't just kill recklessly, he killed when he could do it right.
The reputation. Most feared man in the underworld. By the mid-1930s, Pittsburgh Phil's reputation was legendary. When an out-of-town mob needed a contract killer, they asked for Strauss by name. Detroit's Purple Gang couldn't handle a cunning mobster named Harry Millman. They called Murder Inc. Murder Inc. sent Pittsburgh Phil. A Connecticut mob boss needed someone eliminated. They requested Phil. California gangsters had a problem. Phil got on a plane. Strauss traveled the country executing contracts. He didn't know most of his victims' names, didn't care to find out. When prosecutors finally cracked Murder Inc. in 1940, they developed solid evidence tying Strauss to 28 murders. Law enforcement from Connecticut to California identified at least that many more where Strauss was positively ID'd. But most sources agree the real number was much higher, probably over 100, possibly as many as 500. Strauss was the most prolific contract killer the American Mafia ever produced, and he'd done it all without ever carrying a weapon. The fall, when one rat destroyed Murder Inc. November 1940, Brooklyn. Abe Kid Twist Rellis sat in a police interrogation room. Rellis was a Murder Inc. hitman, one of Strauss's colleagues. He'd participated in dozens of murders himself. But Rellis had been arrested, and he was facing the electric chair. So Rellis made a deal. He'd testify against his fellow killers in exchange for protection. He'd tell prosecutors everything, every murder, every method, every detail of Murder Inc.'s operations. Rellis was the perfect witness. He had first-hand knowledge of hundreds of murders. He knew the organizational structure. He could identify who ordered the hits, who carried them out, where the bodies were buried. Prosecutors couldn't believe their luck. For years, Murder Inc. had operated with near impunity. Dozens of unsolved murders, no witnesses willing to talk, no evidence connecting the killers to the crimes. Now, Rellis was giving them everything. Prosecutor Burton Turkis asked Rellis how he could kill so easily. "Did your conscience ever bother you?" Rellis asked how Turkis felt trying his first case as a lawyer. "I was rather nervous," Turkis admitted. "And how about your second case?" Rellis said. The point was clear. The first time was hard. After that, it was just a job. Based on Rellis's testimony, prosecutors arrested multiple Murder Inc. members, including Harry Strauss. They charged him with murdering Irvin Puggy Feinstein, the ice pick and rope kill from 1932, plus at least 5 other known murders. Strauss knew he was in trouble. For the first time in his career, there was a witness, someone who'd been there, someone who could testify about what happened in that Brooklyn house. Strauss tried every trick he knew. He feigned insanity in the courtroom, acted crazy, bizarre behavior, hoping for an insanity defense. The jury didn't buy it.
The end. Old Sparky. June 12, 1941. Sing Sing Prison, New York. Harry, Pittsburgh Phil Strauss, was strapped into Old Sparky, the prison's electric chair. He'd been convicted of first-degree murder. The jury deliberated just 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict. Strauss had tried everything to avoid this moment. The insanity defense, appeals, delays, nothing worked. At 11 p.m., the executioner
pulled the switch. 2,000 volts surged through Strauss's body. Pittsburgh Phil, the most prolific contract killer in American history, was dead at age 31. Fellow Murder Inc. hitman Martin Bugsy Goldstein was executed the same night, just minutes after Strauss. In the months that followed, prosecutors used Relis's testimony to convict multiple Murder Inc. members. Louis Lepke Buchholter, the boss of Murder Inc., went to the electric chair in 1944. Albert Anastasia avoided prosecution, but the investigation effectively destroyed Murder Inc. The Mafia's national enforcement arm was finished. All because Abe Relis decided to talk. The irony. What killed Pittsburgh Phil? Here's the thing about Harry Strauss's career. For over a decade, he'd murdered at least 100 people, probably many more. He traveled the country executing contracts. He used ice picks, ropes, axes, knives, drowning, live burial, strangulation, and he'd never gotten caught. Why? Because of his personal rule: never carry a weapon. If cops stopped them, they found nothing. No evidence, no proof, just a well-dressed man with a suitcase. His method made him nearly impossible to prosecute. Police might suspect him, but they couldn't prove anything. What finally destroyed Harry Strauss wasn't evidence, wasn't forensics, wasn't police work. It was betrayal. One of his own, Abe Relis, decided saving his own life was more important than keeping the code of silence. Relis gave prosecutors everything they needed: eyewitness testimony, details about the murders, information that could only come from someone who'd been there. And just like that, Pittsburgh Phil's brilliant system collapsed. All the precautions, the refusal to carry weapons, the careful methods, the professional approach didn't matter when your own partner testified against you. The Mafia has a saying: 3 can keep a secret if 2 are dead. Pittsburgh Phil should have remembered that. The legacy: a new kind of killer. Harry Strauss changed how the Mafia viewed contract killing. Before Pittsburgh Phil, mob hits were often messy. Hot-headed gangsters shooting rivals in public, drive-by killings, obvious mob murders that drew police attention. Strauss brought professionalism to murder. He traveled clean, no weapons. He scouted locations carefully. He adapted to each situation. He used whatever was available. And most importantly, he left no evidence connecting him to the crime. This approach became the model for future mob hitmen. Roy DeMeo, the Gambino family killer who murdered over 200 people in the 1970s, studied methods like Strauss's. Different technique, same principle. Make it hard to prove. Richard Kuklinski, the so-called Iceman, claimed he learned from studying famous killers like Pittsburgh Phil. Used different methods, no patterns, no signatures. Even today, when organized crime historians discuss contract killing, Harry Strauss is considered the standard, the prototype, the first true professional hitman in American organized crime. He killed over 100 people and was only convicted because one of his partners broke the code of silence. That's how good he was.
The question: why refuse to carry a gun? People always ask, why didn't Pittsburgh Phil just carry a gun? Guns were the standard mob weapon. Quick, effective, reliable. But Strauss understood something other killers didn't. The real danger wasn't the murder itself. It was getting caught before or after. If you carry a gun, you're vulnerable every moment you're not actively using it. Cops can stop you for anything: traffic violation, suspicious behavior, wrong place at the wrong time. If they search you and find a gun, you're arrested.
Maybe they can't prove you killed anyone with it, but you're off the streets, in jail, unable to work. And if the gun is ever connected to a murder, ballistics, witnesses, anything, you're done. Strauss eliminated all those risks by refusing to carry weapons. The police could stop him anytime, search his hotel room, go through his suitcase. They'd find nothing illegal, just a man with nice clothes and a clean shirt. This gave Strauss something other hitmen didn't have: freedom of movement. He could fly on planes without worry, walk through train stations, check into hotels, eat at restaurants, all while planning murders. And when the moment came to kill, he just grabbed whatever was nearby: an ice pick from a bar counter, a rope from a garage, an axe from a theater wall. The weapon didn't matter. What mattered was never getting caught with it before you used it. That philosophy kept Pittsburgh Phil free for over a decade while he committed over 100 murders. Only when one of his own partners testified against him did the system fail. The message: how the Mafia learned from Pittsburgh Phil. Murder, Inc.'s destruction in 1940 taught the Mafia important lessons. First, professional killers are valuable, but they're also dangerous. If one decides to cooperate with prosecutors, the entire organization is vulnerable. That's why future mob families became more compartmentalized. Killers didn't know the big picture. They got orders from their immediate boss. They didn't meet the top bosses. They didn't know what to cruise. If they were arrested and decided to talk, they could only damage their small piece of the organization. Second, the refusal to carry weapons, Pittsburgh Phil's signature approach, became standard practice for careful mobsters. Don't walk around armed unless you're about to commit a crime. Don't give cops a reason to arrest you. Stay clean until the moment you need to act. This principle extended beyond murder. Smart mobsters avoided attracting attention. They dressed well, drove nice cars, but not too flashy, paid taxes on legitimate income, acted like successful businessmen. The Mafia learned the biggest threat isn't law enforcement investigation. It's giving them a reason to investigate in the first place. Third, the Witness Protection Program, created largely in response to informants like Abe Raylis, changed the game forever. Before Raylis, witnesses who testified against the mob usually ended up dead. That fear kept most people quiet. But Raylis survived. He was protected by police, and even though he eventually died under mysterious circumstances, fell from a hotel window while under police guard, his testimony had already destroyed Murder, Inc. Future witnesses realized they could testify and live. The code of silence started cracking. Harry Hay Pittsburgh Phil Strauss was the most successful contract killer in American organized crime history. He murdered over 100 people across a dozen states. He used ice picks, ropes, knives, axes, drowning, and strangulation. He was arrested 18 times and never convicted until his own partner testified against him. And he did it all without ever carrying a weapon. His method was simple: stay clean until the moment you act. Use whatever's available. Leave no evidence. For over a decade, it worked perfectly. But Pittsburgh Phil forgot one thing. In the mob, your greatest weapon is also your greatest vulnerability: the people you work with. Guns can't testify against you. Ice picks can't take the stand. Ropes can't make deals with prosecutors. But your partners can. And when Abe Raylis decided his life was worth more than the code of silence, all of Pittsburgh Phil's careful planning, all his professional methods, all his brilliance as a killer, none of it mattered. On June 12, 1941, at age 31, Harry Strauss walked into Sing Sing's execution chamber. They strapped him into Old Sparky, the man who'd killed over 100 people without ever carrying a weapon. died with 2,000 volts of electricity. And the Mafia learned the lesson they never forget. The hitman who refuses to carry a gun can still be the most dangerous man in the room. Just make sure he never has a reason to talk.
1943, FBI Headquarters, Washington, D.C. J. Edgar Hoover opened a new file. Subject: Francis Albert Sinatra. Singer, age 27. The FBI director had received reports that the young crooner who was driving teenage girls crazy across America had suspicious connections. Communist sympathizers, mob bosses, draft dodgers. Hoover assigned agents to watch him, document his movements, record his associations. The file would grow for the next 40 years, page after page. Surveillance reports, wiretapped conversations, informant tips. By the time Sinatra died in 1998, the FBI had compiled 2,403 pages on him, one of the longest celebrity surveillance files in Bureau history. And despite 4 decades of investigation, thousands of documented mob contacts, and overwhelming evidence of criminal associations, Frank Sinatra was never charged with a single crime. This is the story of how the FBI tracked America's most famous singer, how they documented his friendships with murder-for-hire mob bosses, how they watched him introduce gangsters to his sitting president, and how Sinatra became so powerful, so connected, so influential that he became untouchable, even to the FBI. The beginning, when a skinny kid became a star. 1915, Hoboken, New Jersey. Frank Sinatra was born December 12th to Italian immigrant parents. His father, Anthony, was a bantamweight boxer turned tavern owner. His mother, Dolly, was a Democratic Party ward boss, a tough, connected woman who knew how to work the political machine. Young Frank grew up in a rough neighborhood. Irish and Italian immigrants, dock workers, street gangs, poverty. Sinatra later said, "If it had not been for my interest in music, I would have likely ended up in a life of crime." He wasn't exaggerating. The neighborhood produced its share of mobsters, and Sinatra's godfather was one of them. Guarino Willie Moretti, born in Bari, Italy in 1994, underboss of the Genovese family crime family, based in Bergen County, New Jersey, just across the river from Manhattan. Moretti controlled illegal gambling dens across New Jersey and upstate New York. He ran bookmaking operations in major factories. He worked with Lucky Luciano, Joe Adonis, the biggest names in organized crime. And he took a liking to young Frank Sinatra. By the late 1930s, Sinatra was singing in local clubs, small venues, roadhouses, places Moretti owned or frequented. Moretti gave him gigs, paid him to perform at his illegal gambling casinos, dice barns they called them, the Riviera on the Jersey Palisades, places where high rollers gambled and needed entertainment. Sinatra's popularity grew. In 1939, he signed with trumpeter Harry James's big band. Then later that year, the big break. Tommy Dorsey wanted Sinatra to front his band. Dorsey was huge. His mellow trombone sound was nationally known. Singing with Dorsey meant exposure, radio time, recording contracts. Sinatra signed. The contract gave Sinatra $125 a week, a princely sum in 1939. But the contract had a catch. By its terms, 43% of Frank Sinatra's earnings would belong to Tommy Dorsey and his agent forever. Forever.
By 1943, Sinatra was a national sensation. Teenage girls, Bobby Soxes, fainted at his concerts. He was making hits, selling out shows. His earning potential was enormous. But Dorsey owned 43% for life. Sinatra wanted out. His representatives offered Dorsey $60,000 to tear up the contract. Dorsey refused. Then Willie Moretti got involved. According to multiple accounts, Moretti and a few associates paid an unannounced visit to Dorsey in Los Angeles. Moretti allegedly jammed a barrel of a gun into Dorsey's mouth and told him he'd pull the trigger if he didn't release Sinatra. Dorsey sold Sinatra's contract for $1. Sinatra consistently denied that Moretti had anything to do with it. He claimed hard negotiations convinced Dorsey. But Moretti bragged privately about the gun incident. And years later, when Mario Puzo wrote The Godfather, the scene where Vito Corleone gets Johnny Fontane out of his contract, the one involving a horse's head in the bed, was reportedly inspired by the Moretti-Dorsey story. The FBI started watching Sinatra around this time. 1943, the draft. Sinatra was classified 4F, not acceptable for military service. The official reason? Perforated left eardrum. But rumors spread. Columnist Walter Winchell reported that Sinatra paid $40,000 to avoid service, that a doctor was bribed to declare him unfit. The FBI investigated. They found no evidence of bribery. The perforated eardrum was real. Sinatra also had psychological issues, emotional instability that made him unacceptable from a psychiatric viewpoint. The allegations were baseless, but the investigation opened Sinatra's FBI file, and once opened, it never closed. The surveillance, 40 years of watching. J. Edgar Hoover didn't trust Frank Sinatra. The FBI director had two major concerns: communism and organized crime. Sinatra fit both profiles. First, Sinatra held liberal political views. He supported the Democratic Party. He championed civil rights at a time that was considered radical. In 1945, he made a short film called The House I Live In, where he told kids that all people are equal regardless of race, color, or creed. In McCarthy-era America, that kind of talk raised suspicions. The FBI investigated whether Sinatra was a Communist Party member. In 1955, Philadelphia FBI agents wrote, "We have received reliable and confidential information that Sinatra, famous star of cinema and radio, is a member of the Communist Party." Another memorandum from Detroit showed the FBI was seriously interested in verifying his membership of the Communist Party of Michigan. The investigation never found evidence. Sinatra wasn't a communist, but the suspicion remained in his file. Second, and more seriously, Sinatra associated with mobsters constantly, publicly, unapologetically. The FBI documented it all. Sinatra's file contains sections with headings like associations with criminals and hoodlums and accusations of being a dope racketeer. There's accounts of gifts from Joseph and Charles Fischetti, brothers in the Chicago outfit who ran illegal gambling operations. There's documentation of Sinatra attending the wedding of Philadelphia mobster Angelo Bruno's daughter, making a Godfather-style appearance as a favor. There were FBI surveillance reports of Sinatra carousing with Detroit mobsters Anthony and Vito Giacalone. It was like clockwork, Samrafino later said. A few times a year, we trailed the Giacalones to the airport to pick up Sinatra.
And most prominently, there's Sam Giancana. Sam Giancana was the Chicago outfit boss, successor to Al Capone, the most powerful mob figure in America during the 1960s. He'd been arrested over 70 times. He was suspected of ordering the murders of more than 200 men. He controlled organized crime across the Chicago area: gambling, extortion, labor racketeering, murder for hire. And he was Frank Sinatra's close friend. The FBI wiretapped Giancana's conversations. They documented regular contact with Sinatra, meetings in Las Vegas, calls between them, social gatherings. Giancana trusted Sinatra, and Sinatra used that trust to expand his own power and influence. The FBI watched, documented, built the file. But they couldn't prove Sinatra was involved in criminal activity. Associating with mobsters wasn't illegal. Accepting gifts wasn't a crime. Being friends with murderers didn't violate any law. Sinatra flaunted his mob connections. He took photographs with known gangsters. He performed at mob-owned venues. He vacationed at mob hangouts. And when asked about it, Sinatra said, "Any report that I fraternized with goons or racketeers is a vicious lie." The FBI knew it wasn't a lie, but they couldn't prove crimes. Then, in 1950, Sinatra made an unexpected offer. He sent an associate to J. Edgar Hoover. The message? Sinatra was willing to work as an FBI informant. Perhaps Sinatra thought it would protect him from the swirling rumors, or maybe he genuinely wanted to help. Either way, he offered his services. The FBI declined. One of Hoover's aides wrote on the report, "We want nothing to do with him." The FBI didn't want Sinatra as an informant. They wanted him as a target.
The president when mob and politics collided. 1960. Presidential campaign. John F. Kennedy was running for president. Young, charismatic, Catholic. He needed every advantage. Frank Sinatra wanted to help. Kennedy was his friend. They'd met through Peter Lawford, the actor who'd married Kennedy's sister, Patricia. Sinatra drew himself into the campaign. He organized fundraisers. He performed at rallies. He got his Rat Pack friends, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., to campaign for JFK. And, according to FBI files, Sinatra did something else. He allegedly introduced Sam Giancana to Kennedy's campaign team. The idea was simple. Giancana controlled Chicago. The Chicago outfit controlled unions, especially the Teamsters. Unions meant votes. If Giancana delivered Chicago's union votes, Kennedy might win Illinois. And Illinois was critical to winning the presidency. The FBI documented this connection. Surveillance reports, wiretaps, informant tips. Whether Giancana actually delivered votes is disputed. What's not disputed, Sinatra facilitated meetings between Kennedy's people and mob bosses. Kennedy won the 1960 election. Illinois went to Kennedy by fewer than 9,000 votes. Some historians believe union votes, delivered by mob-controlled unions, made the difference. After the inauguration, Sinatra remained close to JFK. He organized the inaugural gala in Washington, D.C., on January 10, 1961, the night before Kennedy was sworn in. Kennedy visited Sinatra in Palm Springs. They partied together, womanized together. The President of the United States and the singer were documented mob connections. The FBI watched nervously. Then, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, JFK's younger brother, started a major crackdown on organized crime. He went after the Teamsters, he targeted mob bosses, and he saw Sinatra's FBI file. RFK was horrified.
The president's friend was consorting with Chicago's top mobster, the same mobster RFK was trying to put in prison. In 1962, JFK was scheduled to visit Palm Springs. Sinatra had spared no expense preparing. He built a helipad at his compound specifically for the president's helicopter, renovated guest quarters, made everything perfect. Days before the visit, RFK intervened. He told JFK, "You cannot stay at Sinatra's house. The FBI has documented his mob ties. It looks terrible." JFK canceled. Instead, he stayed at Bing Crosby's house, the Republican crooner, but one without mob connections. Sinatra was devastated, furious. According to witnesses, he grabbed the sledgehammer and destroyed the helipad he'd built for Kennedy, smashed it to pieces. The friendship was over, but the FBI kept watching because Sinatra's most public mob connection was about to cost him everything. The casino, when everything fell apart. 1960, Lake Tahoe, Nevada. Sinatra bought a share in the Cal Neva Lodge and Casino, a resort straddling the California-Nevada border on the shores of Lake Tahoe. He renovated it extensively. He built a celebrity showroom for big-name entertainment. He constructed a helipad on the roof. He had tunnels excavated underground, carpeted, brick-lined tunnels so celebrities could move between the showroom and lakeside bungalows without being seen by fans of paparazzi. By 1962, Sinatra reportedly held a 50% share in the hotel. Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., and Peter Lawford performed there. The Rat Pack made it one of Nevada's hottest casinos. Marilyn Monroe visited, Joe DiMaggio, Juliet Prowse. Everyone wanted to be at Sinatra's Cal Neva. But Sinatra had a problem. Sam Giancana. Giancana was on Nevada's Black Book, the list of excluded persons. This was a list of known mobsters who were banned from EULA entering any Nevada casino. Casino owners who willingly allowed Black Book members on their premises risked losing their gambling license. Giancana was one of the original 11 men on that list. And he was visiting the Cal Neva regularly. Giancana's girlfriend, Phyllis McGuire, one of the famous McGuire sisters singing group, performed at the Cal Neva. Giancana came to see her, stayed in one of the lakeside cottages, used the underground tunnels to move around unseen. Sinatra allowed it. Maybe he thought the tunnels would keep Giancana hidden. Maybe he didn't care. The FBI, no. They had surveillance on Giancana. They knew every time he visited Lake Tahoe. July 13th, 1963. Giancana was at the Cal Neva from July 17th to 28th. He stayed with Phyllis McGuire while she performed. On one of those nights, Giancana got into a heated argument with McGuire's manager, Victor Collins. Words turned to fists. A full brawl erupted. The fight drew attention. Undercover FBI agents happened to be in the area. They identified Giancana. The FBI immediately alerted the Nevada Gaming Control Board. August 1963. Ed Olson, chairman of the Nevada Gaming Control Board, launched an investigation. He issued subpoenas for Sinatra to provide evidence that he didn't knowingly allow Giancana on the premises. Sinatra called Olson and made a fatal mistake. He threatened him. "Just you try and find me with a subpoena," Sinatra told Olson, according to official Gaming Commission records. "And if you do, you can look for a big fat surprise." Olson was unimpressed. He'd stood up to plenty of tough guys. He wasn't backing down to a singer, no matter how famous. The Gaming Commission gave Sinatra a deadline, October 7, 1963. Provide evidence or face consequences. The deadline came and went. Sinatra provided no evidence. October 22, 1963. The Nevada Gaming Control Board revoked Frank Sinatra's gambling license. The decision was final. Sinatra was permanently banned from holding a gaming license in Nevada. He was forced to sell his interests in the Cal Neva and his stake in the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, where he'd been performing for as much as $100,000 per week. It was a massive financial blow and a public humiliation. The FBI documented it all in Sinatra's file. They noted that Giancana was furious with Sinatra. According to wiretaps, Giancana blamed Sinatra for the ordeal, for not being more careful, for drawing FBI attention. The friendship between Sinatra and Giancana deteriorated. According to FBI surveillance, Giancana no longer trusted Sinatra after he'd been spotted with Kennedy. The mob decided Sinatra was a liability, too much attention, too many FBI agents watching. But Sinatra's troubles with Nevada weren't over, because 18 years later, he would do the impossible. The comeback, when power trumped everything. 1980, Las Vegas, Nevada. Frank Sinatra was 65 years old. He'd been banned from Nevada casinos for 17 years. But times had changed. The Reagan era was beginning. Corporate interests were taking over Las Vegas. The mob's influence was waning. And Sinatra wanted his gaming license back. Caesar's Palace wanted to hire him as an entertainment and public relations consultant. Big salary, high profile. But it required a gaming license. Sinatra applied. The Nevada Gaming Control Board held hearings. 6 hours of testimony in February 1981. Sinatra denied everything. He claimed the reports that organized crime had aided his career were ridiculous. He testified on oath that he did not invite Giancana to the club and wasn't aware he was there, despite Phyllis McGuire testifying on oath that Giancana was at the club 5 or 6 nights and Sinatra was present. Sinatra's lawyer explained away the 1963 incident. Sinatra was making a movie at the time. He was traveling between California and Nevada. It was all a misunderstanding. The FBI refused to turn over Sinatra's file to the Gaming Control Board, stating the board was not a bona fide law enforcement agency. So the board couldn't see the 2,403 pages documenting 4 decades of mob associations. During the hearing, character witnesses testified for Sinatra. Actor Kirk Douglas, Gregory Peck, Los Angeles County Sheriff Peter Pitches, and Sinatra listed President Ronald Reagan as a reference on his application. Reagan, who Sinatra had campaigned for, raised money for, and supported publicly. February 11, 1981. The Nevada Gaming Control Board voted unanimously to give Sinatra a 6-month license as entertainment and public relations consultant at Caesar's Palace. Chairman Richard Bunker said, "In the gaming business, we are not going to have a group of choir boys. I'm not suggesting Sinatra is a saint, but in the areas we have investigated, we have not found a reason to deny the license." The Gaming Commission approved the decision February 19, 1981. Frank Sinatra had his license back after 17 years, despite the FBI file, despite documented mob connections, despite everything. Richard Bunker told reporters, "I'm tired of hearing that whatever happens in Nevada is wired." But many observers believed it was wired. Sinatra had friends in high places, political connections, powerful allies. He'd become untouchable. The FBI kept Sinatra's file open until 1985. 2 more years of surveillance reports. Then they finally closed it. 42 years of investigation, 2,403 pages, thousands of documented mob contacts. 0 criminal charges.
The mystery. Why was he never charged? The question everyone asks, how did Sinatra avoid prosecution? The FBI had overwhelming evidence of his mob associations. They documented his friendship with Sam Giancana. They recorded his contacts with the Giacalone brothers, the Fischetti brothers, Carlo Gambino, Lucky Luciano, and dozens of other mobsters. They knew about the Tommy Borsi contract. They suspected Willie Moretti's involvement. They watched him introduce mob bosses to a president of the United States. Why was he never charged? There are several answers. First, associating with criminals isn't illegal. Sinatra never participated in criminal activity, at least not that the FBI could prove. He attended mob weddings, performed in mob casinos, accepted mob gifts. But he didn't kill anyone, didn't run gambling operations, didn't deal drugs or extort businesses. He was a celebrity who knew gangsters. That's not a crime. Second, Sinatra was careful. He never discussed business where the FBI could hear. He didn't participate in criminal meetings. The mob bosses kept him separate from their illegal operations. Giancana liked Sinatra, but Giancana didn't involve him in Chicago outfit business. Sinatra was a friend, an entertainer, a connection to celebrities and politicians, not a criminal partner. Then third, Sinatra had power of his own. Political connections, wealthy friends, Hollywood influence, media access. When the FBI investigated him, Sinatra could call powerful people, senators, governors, studio executives. They'd vouch for him, defend him, pressure the FBI to back off. And fourth, J. Edgar Hoover was pragmatic. The FBI director maintained files on everyone powerful. Celebrities, politicians, civil rights leaders. The files were leverage, information, control. But prosecuting Sinatra would have been difficult, expensive, public, a media circus. For what? Proving he knew mobsters? Everyone already knew that. Sinatra didn't hide it. Hoover preferred to document and watch, keep the file, maintain surveillance, use the information when needed, but never prosecute. By the 1980s, when Sinatra got his gaming license back, the calculation had shifted. The mob's power was declining. Corporate Vegas was rising. Sinatra was old, less relevant to organized crime. And he had friends at the highest levels, including the President of the United States. The gaming board gave him the license because denying it would have been more trouble than it was worth. The legacy. What Sinatra's file reveals. Frank Sinatra died May 14, 1998, at age 82. The FBI released his file later that year in response to Freedom of Information Act requests. Most of the 2,403 pages became public, though 25 pages remain redacted to this day. The file revealed what everyone suspected but couldn't prove. Sinatra had deep, long-time connections to organized crime. He socialized with mob bosses, he accepted their help, he repaid favors. But the file also revealed what prosecutors could never prove. Sinatra was involved in criminal activity. He walked the line perfectly, close enough to the mob to benefit from their power, far enough away to avoid prosecution. The file shows a man who understood power, who used connections, both legitimate and criminal, to build an empire, who refused to be constrained by conventional rules. It shows a man who lived truly his way. But it also shows the limits of law enforcement. The FBI watched Sinatra for 40 years. They documented everything. They built one of the most extensive celebrity surveillance files in American history, and they never charged him with anything. That's not because Sinatra was innocent. It's because he was smart, connected, and powerful enough to stay just beyond reach.
The FBI file proves Sinatra knew mobsters. What it doesn't prove, what it could never prove, was whether he was one of them. Sinatra always denied it. Any report that I fraternized with goons or racketeers is a vicious lie.
The 2,403 pages in his FBI file tell a different story. But ultimately, it doesn't matter, because Frank Sinatra became something the mob bosses never could. Legitimately powerful, socially acceptable, untouchable by law enforcement. The mobsters went to prison. Giancana was murdered in 1975. Willie Moretti was executed in 1951. The Giacalones spent years in federal prison. Frank Sinatra got his gaming license back and performed at Reagan's inaugural. He received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1985. He died wealthy, famous, beloved by millions. The FBI watched for 40 years, documented it all, filed 2,403 pages, and in the end, they couldn't touch him. That's the real lesson of Sinatra's FBI file. In America, if you're powerful enough, connected enough, if you know how to work the system, you can be friends with murderers, consort with mobsters, facilitate meetings between organized crime and the President of the United States, and walk away untouched. Frank Sinatra did it his way, and the FBI could only watch and write it down. If you want to understand how power really works in America, how celebrity, politics, and organized crime intersect, study Frank Sinatra's FBI file. Because it's not a story about a singer who knew some bad guys. It's a story about how someone can be surrounded by criminal activity, documented by federal law enforcement for 4 decades, and never face consequences. The FBI had 2,403 pages of evidence, and it wasn't enough. That tells you everything you need to know about power in America, and about the man who sang, "I did it my way." He really did. January 6th, 1978, River Forest, Illinois. A crew of professional burglars crept up to a ranch-style mansion at 1407 Ashland Avenue. The house belonged to Anthony Accardo, known in Chicago as Big Tuna or Joe Batters, 71 years old, supposedly retired from the Chicago outfit. Accardo was in California with his wife, escaping the harsh Chicago winter. The burglars knew the house alarm system. One of them, John Mendel, was the best bypass man in Chicago. He could disable any alarm. They broke in, ransacked the place, stole jewelry, cash, valuables. Then they left before sunrise. 9 days later, John Mendel disappeared. His body turned up 6 weeks after that, in the trunk of his car. Arms bound, throat slashed, a rope tied next to the wound to slow the blood flow. They'd forced him to watch himself bleed to death. By April, all 6 members of the burglary crew were dead. Stabbed, shot in the back of the head, throat slit, bodies in trunks, alleys, parking lots. Then the hitman who'd executed the burglars turned up dead too. 10 murders in 4 months, all connected to one burglary. The FBI had assumed Tony Accardo was retired, a harmless old man spending winters in Palm Springs. They were wrong. This is the story of Anthony Accardo, the mobster who led the Chicago outfit for nearly 50 years. How he started as Al Capone's bodyguard and became the most successful mob boss in American history. How he survived when every other boss went to prison or got murdered. And how the FBI finally realized the old man in River Forest wasn't retired at all. He was still calling every shot. the kid from Cicero. April 28, 1906, Chicago, Illinois. Antonio Leonardo Accardo was born to Sicilian immigrants. His father was a shoemaker. The family lived near Grand and Ashland on the near west side, a poor Italian neighborhood packed with recent immigrants. At 14, Accardo dropped out of school. He started hanging around pool halls, committing petty crimes, theft, burglary, the usual path for poor kids in his neighborhood. He joined the Circus Cafe gang, one of many small street gangs operating in Chicago during the 1920s. These gangs were talent pools for the larger organizations. Jack Machine Gun McGurn noticed Accardo. McGurn was a hitman for Capone's organization. He recruited the young Accardo into his crew. During Prohibition, Accardo became Capone's bodyguard and driver. He sat in the lobby at a Lexington hotel, protecting Capone's suite. He accompanied Capone everywhere, and he earned the reputation as Capone's enforcer. The story, possibly exaggerated, but repeated enough to become a legend, goes like this. 3 mobsters had betrayed the outfit. Capone ordered them killed. Accardo beat all 3 to death with a baseball bat. Capone watched and said, "Boy, this kid's a real Joe Badass." The nickname stuck. In 1932, Capone went to federal prison for tax evasion. Frank Nitti took over as boss. Accardo continued rising through the ranks. By the 1940s, Accardo ran his own crew. He controlled gambling, loan sharking, bookmaking, extortion. He earned millions for the outfit and took his percentage off the top. When Nitti committed suicide in 1943, Paul Ricca officially became boss, but Ricca named Accardo as underboss. They would run the Chicago outfit for the next 30 years together.
The businessman boss. Accardo understood something other my bosses didn't. Violence attracts attention. His contemporary, Sam Giancana, was flashy. Giancana dated celebrities. He frequented nightclubs. He drove expensive cars. The FBI followed him constantly. Accardo did the opposite. He lived quietly in River Forest, a respectable suburb. He dressed well, but not flashily. He stayed married to his wife, Clarice, for 58 years until his death. No girlfriends, no wild parties. To outsiders, he looked like a successful, legitimate businessman. Behind the scenes, Accardo was modernizing the outfit. He moved them into new rackets, coin-operated machines, counterfeiting cigarette and liquor tax stamps, narcotic smuggling. He sent representatives into non-traditional territories, Iowa, Nebraska, Oklahoma. He invested in Las Vegas casinos and Cuban gambling operations. Most importantly, Accardo understood delegation. In 1957, he stepped back from day-to-day operations and let Sam Giancana take over as boss. Accardo became consigliere, the senior advisor. But everyone knew who really called the shots. When Giancana's flashy lifestyle attracted too much FBI attention, Accardo removed them in 1966 and installed Joey Aiuppa. When Giancana returned from exile in Mexico in 1975, he was murdered while cooking dinner in his basement, shot in the back of the head. The order almost certainly came from Accardo. Paul Ricca died in 1972. That left Accardo as the ultimate authority in the Chicago outfit. And he'd done all of this while barely spending a day in jail. The arrest record that led nowhere. Accardo's arrest record started in 1923 and continued for decades. He was arrested multiple times, questioned about murders, including the 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre, investigated for extortion, gambling, labor racketeering. In 1950 and 1951, Accardo testified before the Kefauver Committee, the Senate committee investigating organized crime.
He took the Fifth Amendment 172 times. In November 1960, the government finally won a conviction: tax evasion. Accardo was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison and a $15,000 fine. It looked like the FBI had finally got him. Then, an appeals court overturned the conviction. The judges ruled the prejudicial newspaper publicity during his trial had denied him a fair hearing. Accardo was acquitted at retrial. That was it. His only conviction overturned on appeal. Despite 80 decades in organized crime, despite ordering countless murders, running gambling empires, controlling unions, laundering millions, Accardo spent exactly one night in jail. That one night happened on Lincoln's birthday in 1945. He was taken into custody for questioning about a gambling case. The courts were closed for the holiday. He had to stay overnight until they reopened. One night in 86 years. No other major American mob boss can claim that record.
The 1978 massacre. By the mid-1970s, the FBI considered Accardo semi-retired. He was in his early 70s. He spent winters in California. He lived quietly with his wife. He had legitimate business interests: real estate development, trucking companies, restaurants. The FBI still listed him as part of Chicago's ruling triumvirate, alongside Jackie Cerrone and Joey Aiuppa. But they thought he was mostly advisory, a ceremonial figurehead. The 1978 burglary proved otherwise. Here's what happened. In December 1977, John Mendel's burglary crew pulled off a major jewelry store heist. The store was owned by Harry Levinson, a Jewish bookie who paid protection money to Accardo. Levinson complained to Accardo. The big tuna ordered Mendel to return everything. Mendel was furious. His crew had risked arrest for that score. Now they had to give it back, but they obeyed. They returned the jewelry to Levinson through Accardo. Then Mendel made a fatal decision. He'd rob Accardo's house and take back what was rightfully theirs. January 6, 1978, early morning. Mendel and his crew broke into the River Forest mansion. Accardo was in California. His housekeeper discovered the burglary later that morning and called him. The FBI assumes Accardo made one phone call to Joey Aiuppa. The message: handle it. What followed was systematic elimination. January 15th, John Mendel disappeared. His body was found February 20th in the trunk of his car, naked, hogtied, stabbed, strangled, throat slashed with a rope tied next to the wound to slow the bleeding. January 20th, Bernard Buddy Ryan found shot in the head sitting in his car. February 2nd, Steve Garcia discovered in a trunk at a Sheraton hotel near O'Hare Airport. February 4th, Vince Moretti and Don Reno beaten and stomped to death at a Cicero bar. The jukebox was playing Strangers in the Night while they died. Moretti had been seen wearing Accardo's monogram gold cufflinks around town. April 6th, Bobby Hertog's found in a trunk, shot in the head, throat slashed. April 14th, Johnny McDonald, shot in the head, dumped in an alley. 6 burglars, all dead within 4 months. But Accardo wasn't finished. October 5th, 1978, Michael Volpe, Accardo's houseboy, vanished. He testified before a grand jury investigating the murders. He talked too much. His body was never found. Then the hitmen themselves were eliminated. May 22nd, 1979, Anthony Little Tony Borsellino, shot in the back of the head, body dumped in a Will County cornfield. Months later, Gerald the Jerry the Dinger Caracello, Joey Aiuppa's bodyguard and driver, shot execution style. 10 murders, all connected to one burglary. Nobody was ever arrested. The FBI finally understood. November 10th,
1978. FBI agents raided Accardo's River Forest home. Officially, they were investigating Michael Volpe's disappearance. The houseboy had been scheduled for another grand jury appearance, but vanished before he could testify. The agents searched the entire mansion. In a basement safe, they found $275,000 in cash hidden in a wine box, a police scanner, a glass-enclosed gun case, a 30 by 30 foot basement workshop. The FBI realized this wasn't a retired mobster's house. This was an operational headquarters. And the 10 murders connected to the burglary proved something more important. Accardo still controlled everything. A truly retired boss doesn't order 10 revenge killings. A figurehead doesn't have the power to eliminate an entire burglary crew plus the witnesses and hitmen. Only someone still actively running the organization could orchestrate that level of violence. The FBI had been wrong. Accardo wasn't retired. He'd simply delegated the day-to-day operations while maintaining final authority over major decisions. And when someone robbed his house, disrespected him on his own territory, Accardo responded the same way he had for 50 years. Swift, brutal, total elimination. The message was clear. The old man in River Forest might look like a retiree, but he was still the boss.
The final years. 1979. Accardo sold the River Forest mansion and moved elsewhere in the suburb. Eventually, he moved to Barrington Hills, living with his daughter and son-in-law in an in-law cottage on their 22-acre estate. The FBI continued linking him to union racketeering and organized crime operations, but they never built a prosecutable case. Accardo continued offering counsel to Chicago outfit members. He carried a wooden cane with a handle carved into the shape of a fish, his Big Tuna nickname memorialized in wood. Younger mobsters came to him for advice. He was the institutional memory of the outfit. He'd worked for Capone, he'd built a modern organization, he knew everyone, every operation, every secret. May 22, 1992. Accardo died of congestive heart failure and acute respiratory failure at 86. He died at home, surrounded by family. A free man, never having served significant prison time. His funeral drew mobsters from across the country. Over 2,000 people had attended his daughter's wedding in 1961, a who's who of American organized crime. His funeral was quieter. The outfit was weakening. RICO prosecutions had destroyed most of the leadership. The glory days were over. But Accardo had lived those glory days for nearly 70 years, and he never paid the price. Why Accardo succeeded. Every other major mob boss from Accardo's era went to prison or got murdered. Al Capone, prison. Luciano deported. Frank Costello retired under threat. Vito Genovese, prison. Carlo Gambino died before prosecution. Paul Castellano, murdered. Sam Gianica, murdered. John Gotti, prison. Accardo outlasted them all. Why? First, he kept a low profile. While Gianica dated Phyllis McGuire and drew FBI surveillance everywhere he went, Accardo stayed home with his wife. He looked boring, respectable, not worth watching closely. Second, he delegated. Accardo installed front bosses, Gianica and Ayupa, who took the heat while he made the real decisions from the background. When the FBI investigated the Chicago outfit, they focused on the visible boss, not the retired consigliere. Third, he was smart about money. Accardo ran legitimate businesses. He paid taxes on his legal income. He didn't flaunt wealth. The IRS couldn't build the tax evasion case like they did against Capone.
Fourth, he was ruthless about internal security. Anyone who robbed him died. Anyone who testified against the outfit died. Anyone who showed weakness died. The 1978 massacre sent a message to every Chicago mobster: don't cross the old man. And fifth, he was patient. Accardo never made impulsive decisions. He thought things through. He waited. He let problems resolve themselves when possible, only using violence when absolutely necessary. This combination, low profile, delegation, financial discipline, ruthlessness, and patience, kept Accardo free for 86 years.
The Architect's Fate. One story captures Accardo's approach perfectly. In the 1960s, Accardo hired an architect to design his River Forest mansion. The architect did the work, got paid, and the house was built. Then, the architect gave the blueprints to the FBI. Maybe he thought it was his civic duty. Maybe the FBI pressured him. Either way, he betrayed Accardo's trust. The architect vanished. His body was never found. Accardo was protective of that house. It was his sanctuary, his private territory, the place where he felt safe. When the burglars broke in during 1978, they violated that sanctuary. 10 people died as a result. The house on Ashland Avenue wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of Accardo's power. Attacking it meant attacking him, and nobody attacked Tony Accardo without consequences. For decades, the FBI watched Anthony Accardo. They investigated him for murders, racketeering, extortion, tax evasion. They testified about him before Senate committees. They raided his house. They never made a case stick. When Accardo died in 1992, he'd spent 86 years as a criminal, 70 of them in organized crime, and served 1 night in jail. He'd outlived Al Capone, Paul Ricca, Sam Giancana, and every other boss from his generation. He'd survived Prohibition, the Kefauver hearings, the FBI's war on organized crime, RICO prosecutions, and multiple internal power struggles. And he died peacefully, at home, a free man. The FBI's mistake was assuming that because Accardo looked like a retiree, living quietly in the suburbs, spending winters in California, he must have been retired. The 1978 massacre proved otherwise. 6 burglars, 1 fence, 1 houseboy, and 2 hitmen, all dead within 16 months of that January break-in. The old man in River Forest wasn't retired. He was just smart enough to look harmless while running the most powerful criminal organization in the Midwest. That's what made Tony Accardo the most successful mob boss in American history. Not the longest reign, not the most money, not the biggest territory. The fact that he did it all for 86 years and never spent a night behind bars. The FBI finally understood that in 1978. 40 years too late.